What's up, everybody? Hammerheart Metal Reviews here once again. Today we are doing a discography ranking for you, and we are going to be talking about Kamelot. If you are unfamiliar with this band, they play progressive symphonic power metal. I've been really in a power metal mood lately, so I felt like tackling a bigger ranking, a band with a lot of albums, and I was actually surprised when I was looking back on my old rankings that I had never done a Kamelot ranking, so what better time than now? I will say about this band, there is a very specific era of this band that I absolutely love, but their discography as a whole, I don't think I could say the same thing. It's been a little bit inconsistent. This is definitely a band that I will never own every CD by because there are just some albums that I'm not that into. This band has a few different eras because they've had different vocalists throughout their career. They started out in the early 90s and they're still going to the present day. The one consistent band member has been the guitarist Thomas Youngblood. He's kind of the driving force behind the band. So like I said, I'm going to go through all their albums, 13 albums here, going to rank them from my least favorite up to my favorite. So if you're a diehard fan that you love absolutely everything they've put out, you might not like this video too much because some of these albums I'm not going to be too complimentary of. But overall, there are still a handful of albums here that I think are top tier power metal. I do own a handful of their albums, actually just 4 CDs. That's all I own by them, which coincidentally are going to be my top 4. There are 4 to 5 albums that I go back to on the regular, but I felt like revisiting some of the other ones that I hadn't listened to in quite some time to see if my opinions of them have changed. So without any further rambling, let's just get into this. Let's see what ranking I've got these in. So, coming in last place, my least favorite Kamelot album, I'm going to 2018 with their second most recent album being The Shadow Theory. So this was the third album to feature Tommy Kervik on vocals. This was their third vocalist. But at this point in their career, I just feel like this album was kind of going through the motions. I find it a little bit bland and boring. It's just not up to their standards of what they're capable of. It almost feels like it's just following a set template of like the flow for an album, having like a more aggressive song, a mid-paced one, then a ballad, and kind of just throwing it all together, that they're just doing the same album flow repetitively over and over again. There's not a lot of riffs on this album that really stand out to me. It's more about the symphonics, and it just feels a little generic and almost like poppy, if you will. Like when this album came out, I just wasn't really into it at all. I felt like going back and revisiting it now, but my opinion here hasn't really changed. I just don't like this album. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't do anything for me when I listen to it. I'm not even going to pick favorite songs because I just really don't enjoy this one. But let's move on to some better stuff. Up next in 12th, I'm going all the way back to their debut from 1995, Eternity. So their first couple albums featured the vocalist Mark Vanderbilt, and he's not exactly the best vocalist. That's kind of what holds these first couple albums back. He's going for like a Jeff Tate from Queensryche or Midnight from Crimson Glory kind of vibe here, but he just doesn't quite have the range to pull it off. And even musically at this point in their career, they're almost following that same style like Queensryche or Crimson Glory, more of just like progressive metal, not really heavy on the symphonics here at all. But this isn't like the sound that they are known for. This was a different beast altogether. Much more focus on the riffs here. It's like a stripped down approach, but it just doesn't necessarily stand out amongst the crowd of other like similar bands that were around at the time. The album to me has similar feeling throughout, like some of the songs kind of sound the same. Overall, it's not completely terrible. The title track Eternity is decent, but all in all, it's just not one that I really go back to very often at all. Up next in 11th, I'm going with the album that was right after that, their sophomore album Dominion from 1996. So this still featured the same vocalist as on the debut. I do find that he improved a little bit from the first album to this one, and there's a little bit more variation in the songwriting here as well. But all that being said, it's still not an exceptional album. It's okay. It's just very like basic sounding compared to what they would do afterwards. Like the Kamelot that you're probably familiar with for the most part, if you've heard the band before, isn't this same band. There was better power metal out there at the time than this, and they would write much better albums than this in the future as well. But there's still some shining moments here. There's nice solos sprinkled in. There's even some acoustic moments and a little bit more keyboard than on the debut. But once again, it's just not one I go back to often. The drums are kind of basic. But a highlight would be We Are Not Separate. That's a pretty good song. So all in all, it's okay, but another one that I just don't go to very often. All right, now we're into the top 10. In 10th place, I'm going to their newest album from 2023, The Awakening. So I do feel that it was an improvement over The Shadow Theory. This is the album that was right after that one, but it still has a pretty formulaic feel to it overall. It's not all bad. There are definitely some highlights here. I just don't get that excited listening to this album. It's kind of like background noise. I don't know. There's just something missing. I can't really put my finger on it. Like, there's not anything bad necessarily about it. Like, the vocals are well done, the musicianship is well done, but it just doesn't have that extra punch or the memorability that I'm really looking for that some of their past albums had. Like, overall, once again, this is an okay album. It's not completely terrible, but I just don't love it either. If I had to pick favorite songs here, The Great Divine is decent. Opus of the Night is actually a pretty good song. So all in all, an okay album, but once again, not anything that I feel is amazing. Up next in 9th, I'm going to 2010 with Poetry for the Poisoned. So this was the last album to feature their second singer, Roy Khan, who I have not mentioned yet because all of his albums are pretty killer, with this one being the exception. This album I don't really like. This was a bad way for him to say farewell. This is the last album with him, and it just kind of went some weird directions. It has almost an industrial or electronic influence in certain spots, and I just don't love it. It's got these like annoying vocal effects. Roy Khan doesn't need vocal effects. He's a great singer, but they were just trying some different stuff here, and overall, like, this album just sounds very mediocre. Following a string of excellent albums, this one was a major disappointment, and the fact that it was the last one to feature him on it is just all the more impactful, and it's just very disappointing. The best tracks here, probably Hunter Season, Seal of Woven Years. But when I say that, like, these being the best songs on this album, on any other Roy Khan album, those songs don't stand out. So take that for what it is. I just feel this one was a major disappointment, and that's why I have it in 9th place. Up next in 8th, I'm going to 2015 with the album Haven. So this was the second album to feature Tommy Karavik, and I actually saw them on tour for this album. They were touring through my city with Dragon Force, and Kamelot was headlining, and it was a very good concert. I did get more excited when they were playing the older songs than the new stuff off this album, but nonetheless, this is still a pretty decent album. I will say, for the, like, similar to the later day Kamelot stuff, it does have a more generic, like, commercial sound to it. It's not as interesting as the earlier stuff, but it does retain that mournful, dark tone that they're kind of known for, and it just maybe could use a little more bite or edge. A few faster tracks would really mix things up here. It's just kind of, they're stuck in this like mediocrity zone in this stage of their career. Another one that, like, I think it's decent, it's not bad, but I just don't, like, I don't really return to this album ever. I revisited it to do this ranking, and it's okay, but I still just don't think I'll be going back to it a ton. Best songs on here, Veil of Elysium is pretty good. Insomnia is a good song. All in all, a decent but not great album. Up next in 7th, I'm going to the album right before that, Silverthorn from 2012. This was the first album after Roy Khan left that brought in the new vocalist, Tommy, and I feel like he is a very suitable replacement. Even though I'm not super high on all these later Kamelot albums, it's not because he's not a good singer. He is a very capable singer. It's just huge shoes to fill, and just the style that they went on these later albums, they almost played it way too safe. They just kind of wanted to give the fans what they wanted to hear. Maybe, I don't know, but it just seems like a very safe approach to both the vocals, kind of emulating Roy, and then also with the songwriting, just kind of putting out what they think people wanted to hear. Doesn't really take too many chances. But all that being said, like, this is a more stripped down approach on this album, and this was the one that followed Poetry for the Poisoned, and I think it's much better than Poetry for the Poisoned. It's maybe not full of super memorable songs and not as interesting as the earlier works, but all in all, this is easily my favorite Tommy album. Good standout songs on here: Solitaire, Sacrimony, Angel of Afterlife. Like, all in all, we're getting into better stuff here. This is a decent album. All right, up next in sixth, we're going to go all the way back once again to 1998, their third album, and the introduction of Roy Khan, Siege Perilous from 1998. So this being the first album that he was on, it's not necessarily his strongest performance, but very much better material would follow after this album immediately, and this is still a huge improvement over the first two albums. They kind of started to get their own niche sound, which they were kind of exploring on the first two albums and maybe not necessarily hitting the mark, not really finding their voice, but they're starting to do that here. This album is generally mid-paced for the most part. Like I said, it doesn't hit the highs that the subsequent albums do, but the atmosphere that they've created with the addition of keys here is really well done, and it is a sign of what would follow. Overall, it's a good but not great album, but there are some standouts. Millennium is a great song. Iria is a song that you will be singing along to instantly. All in all, a pretty decent album, especially for the debut of a new vocalist into the band. All right, now we're into the top five. This is where it gets really good. I know maybe some of my comments here have been kind of negative, but I do like this band. I would never say they're one of my favorite bands because of the inconsistencies in their discography, but coming up, these next albums, these are all worth checking out. This is where they really released some amazing stuff, and all of these albums were in a row. But which order am I going to put them in? Let's find out right now. In fifth place, I'm going to 2007 with Ghost Opera. So at this point, this was the last in a string of great albums, I will say. Maybe this one isn't quite on the level of the four that precede it. Obviously, I have it in fifth. The other four are higher, so that's a pretty obvious statement. But nonetheless, this has a little bit more of an accessible sound. It's more symphonic, but it still has its moments. I just prefer the style from the albums that immediately preceded it. They just kind of like oh wow, I can't even talk here. They're trying out some new song styles here, but some of them just didn't necessarily stick the landing, if you will. Like, I applaud them for trying some new stuff and not just sticking in one style is what I'm trying to say. I'm just very poor spoken today. But yeah, this one, once again, it's decent. It's a bit more straightforward, like song structure wise, than maybe the complexities of some of the earlier albums. I go back to this one every now and then, but if I'm in a Kamelot mood, it's going to be the next four that I really go to. But Ghost Opera is still pretty decent. The title track is great. Silence of the Darkness is a great song. All in all, this is like a 7.5 out of 10 album to me. But now we're going to get into stuff that's all 8 out of 10 or higher. Actually, all of these I would put higher than 8 out of 10 for the next four. But let's find out what order I've got them in. Okay, in fourth place, I'm going to the album that was right before that from 2005, The Black Halo. So you might be saying, hey, whoa, that's in fourth place. This seems to be everyone's favorite Kamelot album. To me, I like the three before it a little bit better, but this is still a goddamn great album. This continues the story from the previous album, Epica, that I have not talked about yet. Has a very dark and mournful vibe, but it does retain the overall style that they had kind of developed over the previous albums. It does shift a little bit into some new territory, but overall this is a very strong album. Even though I prefer the preceding album, this is still a great follow-up to finish this story. And like I said, this was the last in a string of four absolutely amazing albums. Like, if you've never heard Kamelot before, this one and the three albums that immediately preceded it that I'm going to talk about right away, those are the albums you should go check out, because those are the ones that really could make you into a fan of the band. Best songs on here: March of Mephisto actually features some guest vocals by Shagrath from Dimmu Borgir. When the Lights Are Down is an amazing song. Serenade is a great closer. Like, all in all, very standout, very solid album. I understand why it's a lot of people's favorites. For me, I like some other ones better, but this is still a goddamn great album. Up next in third, I'm going with the album right before that from 2003, Epica. So a concept story, like I mentioned with The Black Halo, this was the first half of the story. And this absolutely nails the vibe and storytelling style that they are going for here. This is just pure gold. Followed up a couple of pure gold albums with another one. They really just couldn't miss at this point in their career. I wish they could have kept this trajectory going because they were kind of on a constant rise from like some rougher beginnings, and then they really started putting out amazing stuff, but then it started dipping back down after a while. It's hard to put out a ton of great albums in a row, but this album, it just captures the feel. It's a tale of greed and loss and love and vanity, and you feel all that emotion in Roy's voice and in the music itself as well. It just conveys that atmosphere perfectly. I love the mix of song styles on this album as well. You've got the softer ballads, you've got really catchy choruses, you've got power metal bangers, you've got the mid-paced anthems. It's just really great stuff that you're going to be singing along to, and all in all, this album is just an absolute triumph. Great stuff. Standout tracks for me would be Center of the Universe, Farewell, Lost and Damned. All in all, top-notch stuff. This is a 9 out of 10 album for me. Up next in second place, maybe this one will be a surprise because most people would have Epica and the Black Halo as their 1 and 2, and maybe not this one, but for me in second place, I'm going to 1999 with The Fourth Legacy, aptly titled for their 4th album. To me, this is where they really came into their own. This was the second Roy Khan album, but the step up from Siege Perilous to The Fourth Legacy, to me, is just mind-blowing. It's like they became a completely different band. They just really realized their full potential here and found their sound. The songwriting on this album is so much better than those first 3 records, and it just really stands out. Roy Khan came into his own with his voice as well. You got catchy choruses, and once again, really nice variation in the different song styles here as well. It just, yeah, start to finish, this is a great album. This is the first Kamelot album I ever bought and owned, and maybe that's why it sticks out and I have it this high on my list where others may not have it this high. But I just absolutely love this album. That's why I really started exploring more of their stuff. And this just, to me, started their amazing era. From this album in 1999 to the Black Halo in 2005, 4 albums in a row. They're absolutely amazing. Best songs on here, the title track, Fourth Legacy, is a standout. Until Kingdom Come, The Shadow of Uther, The Sailorman's Hymn is a great ballad. All in all, I absolutely love this album. Could have put it in first place, but the one I'm going to talk about next, I think edges it out by a hair. So that leaves one. If you know the band, you know which one I haven't talked about yet, and that is the follow-up to The Fourth Legacy, the album that came before Epica from 2001, Karma. So this one, yeah, continues the style from The Fourth Legacy, but really builds on it and improves on it, in my opinion. It's a very melancholic and moody album, yet it's powerful and so catchy. To me, this is their finest hour. Khan is in top form here. His voice is just so smooth. And once again, like I've mentioned on the last couple albums here, the variation in songwriting is just so good. The songwriting is complex. It brings in those progressive moments, and they don't just stick in one style. Yes, there's songs in one specific style. Oh, here's a power metal song, here's a ballad, but it works that they have the right mix here. They're not too heavy on one style, and just power metal virtuosity here. It's just absolutely killer. Best songs on here, Forever, absolute standout. Across the Highlands, Wings of Despair, the Elizabeth trilogy, all about Elizabeth Bathory at the end of the album as well. Top-notch stuff. One of my favorite power metal albums. And yeah, that's my ranking. So if you know the band, I would love to get your ranking down below. Let me know your picks. Do you love all the albums that I kind of shit on a little bit? If so, that's okay too. Differences of opinions are welcomed on this channel. If everyone had the same opinion, life would be boring. So let me know if you really like those ones and you hate what I had to say about them. That's all good too, but still give me your favorites down below because I like reading them. And yeah, until next time, Hammer Heart Metal Reviews out.